everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kayla Stukins. This is the fourth video in a new series on my channel where I basically read and review books that I've never read before. Today I'm going to be reviewing Sadie by Courtney Summers. This is a murder mystery kind of thriller novel about two young girls, Sadie and Maddie, who are sisters. So Maddie basically ends up dead. We start off the book knowing that Maddie, the younger sibling, is dead and that Sadie has sworn to get her sister justice and to figure out who killed her and wants to kill the person that killed her sister, right? It's also paralleled with narration by a local radio host named West, who is also on the lookout for clues about who murdered Maddie, but specifically where Sadie went, because Sadie, ran away to find the killer, but to everyone else she disappeared. And Sadie is on the lookout for this man named Keith, but he goes by many different names, but she knew him as Keith. He was one of her mom's boyfriends who basically was a really bad guy, and she's pretty sure it's Maddie's murderer, right? So she's on her lookout to find him. So the world building in this book right out of the gate is really well done. It describes a small town in Colorado, basically small town USA, where everybody really kind of knows everybody, or at least you know of a person. It also describes the class divide between the rich and the poor people, and Sadie's family is one of the poor people. They live in a trailer park. And every stop on her journey to find the guy who killed her sister is another small town, another diner, another, small mom and pop restaurant. It's just every place she goes to has so much character to it. And I think that's because we've all known places like this, the small little diner, the small little town, the place where everybody knows everybody, the mom and pop restaurant, hole-in-the-wall diner. We all can identify these things, and we know what these places are. The local restaurant where all the high school kids hang out after school. It's very familiar. We all know these places. The narrative style's actually really, really cool. It makes you feel like you're going online and searching for files and cases and court documents. I really love true crime, and this very much felt like I was looking up a case or I was watching a YouTube video where someone was describing a murder mystery. It felt very real. And speaking of, true crime, a lot of the times on YouTube you'll see videos of people documenting cases, and a lot of the times they'll sometimes get cases solved because of the publicity of it all and the way that there's another mind on it. And it really shows, especially with this book as well, how even the little guy, some random podcast guy, news operator, can solve a case, or at least try to, can put the pieces together better than the police can sometimes. It's also a great way of introducing new characters and giving them personality and explaining events in the storyline. You get first-hand accounts of the family members, random people on the side of the street, like bystanders, the police. You get first-hand accounts from these guys through West's podcast. And then you'd even get pieces of information that West himself researched and found and would put in after the fact, in the studio. It was just cool to see. The podcast even has like a previously on yada 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 and a little jingle. The way it switches back and forth from Sadie's narration, for example, you'd have chapters like this that looked like just a regular book, right? This is Sadie's narration, and then you'd switch back to pages like this, where it's like a podcast where he's interviewing people, and it's a great way of documenting the story in both ways. It's also a great way of kind of withholding information from certain people. There's a chapter where we see Sadie going around different towns showing them this picture of Keith, trying to get people to see if they recognize him, right? We then cut back to the podcast where Wes is talking to May, her grandmother, adoptive grandmother, and they're looking through the scrapbook, and then they get to a page where a photo is missing, and it's kind of assumed, we find out later, that it was the picture that Sadie took, and May can't remember what the picture is, which picture it is, and it's so frustrating because you know which picture it is, and if they had been able to figure out who was in that picture, they could have maybe found her a lot sooner, or figured out who it was that, she was looking for, Keith. They don't even find out what photo it is, who's in it, until page 230. So they don't even know who it is she's looking for until page 230. It's just how long it takes, because it's in the very beginning of the book where they find that photo, and it waits till the very last half of the book to figure out what's going on. It's like last week, if you watch that video, you get to find out different pieces of the story throughout different parts of the book. But unlike last week, this week and this book and Sadie, you get to see it from varying perspectives. You know, Sadie and West, and then the grandmother and the mom and all the different people in the story all are contributing to the story in the first person. And sometimes you'll even meet a character in Sadie's narration or in West's narration, one of the two, and then you'll meet them in the other narration, other point of view later. You know, it's cool how you see both of them separately trying to figure out what happened in the crime, in the case, in the disappearance, and they'll find out different pieces of information. Like Sadie might find out a clue, and then Wes will find out a clue, but none of them, we get to see every clue they uncover, but Sadie never knows everything and Wes never knows everything because they're not clued into what each other are experiencing or what they're finding out. It's also really frustrating because Sadie is like 5 months ahead of West. He got the case like after she had been disappeared for like 5 months, and Sadie has no idea that there is even this podcast going on. You know what I mean? She even turns on the radio and hears West's radio show. I'm assuming it's for something else before that. She turns it on and you hear West's voice, and it's like he's right there, you know what I mean? But it's not the same time, and who knows, maybe it was the very beginning of his like first podcast for this specific crime, for Sadie's disappearance, but we have no idea. You know, she has no idea that some people are looking for her. She has no connection to internet or anything. You know, it really adds that divide when you have two main characters following the same exact path, but they have no interaction. Sadie never meets West. West never meets Sadie. You know, they never interact, but they're following the same exact checkpoints. You know what I mean? It's cool. Also, Sadie disappeared in June, I believe, and then her car was found in July on the side of the road in Fairfield. You know, in the car, she left all of her belongings, all of her clothes, just everything that she had in that car, she left just on the side of the road. And we find that out in the very beginning of the book. So for the majority of the book, we are just waiting for something to happen to Sadie, waiting for her to get kidnapped or for her to have to run from the car really fast. Because if she was planning to leave the car, she would have taken her clothes. You know, the only stuff she has, her backpack, she would have taken that. But we know somehow she got separated from it. So every time she has an encounter with Silas, or when, you know, she finally drives up to Fairfield and we see in her narration that she's there, we know something's about to go down, something's gonna happen, she's gonna get separated, she's gonna get kidnapped, killed. We know something's about to happen. It just adds a suspense to the book, knowing that she's driving around in this car throughout the entire book, and then at the very end, at some point, she's gonna get separated from that car and have no means of transportation and have no idea where she is. The way the author switched between the conflict at Bluebird, which is like a motel, when she is holding a knife to a certain person, to Ellis's throat, you know, switching back and forth between Sadie rummaging around the Keith's apartment and trying to find clues, and then holding a knife to Ellis's throat. Switching back to West's narration months later, trying to find Sadie and not really knowing, does Ellis survive? What's going on? And switching back and forth between her and the conflict of holding a knife to someone's throat and then switching back to them just having a regular conversation on West's side. I mean, we don't even find out that Sadie left this guy alive till 60 pages later. Like, it's just so much suspense of not telling you the whole story until much later, when either West uncovers it through an interview with somebody or just Sadie tells you in passing. Like, do you remember that scene where Sadie is pretending to be Lara, her middle name, and she's having that conversation with Avi? And then she goes to tell him something and we never get to find out what it is, or we don't find out until much later, you know, all the way back on page 120. Well, the whole time I was reading the book, I was waiting for something to get revealed, and it doesn't even get revealed till like page 250 something, when we get to find out that Sadie took Avi to Silas's house and showed him all those pictures, and we find that out through West's podcast. And I just thought it was really cool because, to be honest, I kind of had forgotten a little bit, just a little bit, about Avi and the whole thing, and you know, the author never told us, so I just kind of out of sight, out of mind. You know, there's so much other stuff to focus on. So when they finally revealed it, you know, the way it was structured was really, really cool. You know, you see Sadie and Avi talking, and then it's interrupted, and then you see Sadie go to Silas's house and get in that altercation, and then so much farther on Sadie's journey in the book, we find out that Silas was arrested, you know, through West's narration. And then watching even more of Sadie go through her journey, we eventually find out why he got arrested and what happened after Sadie met Avi in that restaurant, which happened like 120 pages ago. You see what I mean? We get piece by piece of the story through different narrations, through 130 pages of the book. You know, there's so much information. You get sprinkle here, sprinkle later, and then you get the big reveal at the very end. Like literally everything you find out about in the book just kind of feels important. By the first time they do that little sprinkle bit of information, you kind of pick up on the cues a little bit and you start to realize, oh, this little piece of here is probably gonna be important later on in the book, which I think is really cool, how everything feels important. So then at the very end of the book, where Sadie gets hit over the head by Keith, we're so used to them switching back between Sadie's narration and Wes's narration every other chapter that when she gets hit in the head, we're like constantly like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? And then we get to Wes's podcast and we have one of theirs. Don't find anything out about Sadie. And then we have the second podcast of West, and we're like, wait a minute, normally they switch back and forth. Then we get the third podcast and fourth, fifth podcast in the row. I don't remember how many there are exactly, but we get so many of his podcasts in a row, and we're like, wait a minute, what happened to Sadie? Then, you know, through the podcast, we find out that it's been a year since Sadie went missing, and we're like, what? But how did that happen? You know what I mean? And then we find out that Keith is dead. You know, it's just so much suspense that they do. It added a lot to the book, not knowing what happened to Sadie and just hearing it through Wes's narration as he's trying to find her. I also want to talk a little bit about Sadie, our main character, or one of our main characters, but you know, the title character. So Sadie is 20 in the book, and she's basically raised her little sister Maddie since she was born. When she was 6, they're 6 years apart, because her mom either didn't want to or couldn't. You know, she was a drug addict. They lived in this small little trailer park basically. Sadie also has a stutter, which people frequently make fun of, and it's hard for her to relay information to people, which I think was it added a great barrier to the story, because you have this super strong heroine who's trying to find somebody and go through the pieces and clues, and she can't speak clearly, you know, entirely, and her being nervous makes it worse. So it just adds another barrier, another dynamic to the story, and I thought it was really cool. And the dynamic between Maddie, Sadie, and their mother, Claire, was also very interesting and I think very well done. You know, Sadie lied to her sister about what her mother was really suffering from. She said she was sick, you know, instead of that she left them because of a drug addict. You know, she tried to spare her from that pain. You know, Sadie had to grow up very quickly. You know, she never got to have that typical childhood that, you know, kids deserve, people deserve. And, you know, and Maddie always loved her sister and her mother tremendously, obviously, but she always loved her mother a little more, which kind of pained Sadie, because, like, she was the one who raised her entire life, but at the end of the day, it's your mom, you know, what are you gonna do? That's why I love, you know, the part of the end where Sadie's mom finally came back and started grieving like a mother should. And there was a point in the book where Sadie despised having brown hair because both her mom and Maddie had blonde hair and they were alike in that way, and she just felt again like she was not a part of things. And her mom also kind of hated her for that, you know, but we find out later that it's not just because she despises her daughter, it's because Sadie looks so much like Claire's mom, their grandma, their biological grandma, and the grandmother had died, you know, so Sadie's mom was just too much for her to look at this girl who looked just like her mom. You know what I mean? It was just too hard for her. I just liked how there was always a reason for things in the book, even if it was out of hatred. There was always, it wasn't just pure hatred, there's always a reason, which doesn't exactly justify it, but it is an explanation, you know? I also love seeing Sadie kind of discover herself in this book. You know, when she goes to that diner and she meets Avi and his friends and all those people, she starts to discover boys and drinking and dancing and just being a teenager, all the things a teenager should get to do. You know, having fun, because she spent her whole life taking care of her sister and always having to be an adult when she herself was also a kid. And obviously she loves her sister, but it is a burden for her in some ways. So it was nice to see her. It sucks that her sister died, but it's nice to see her start to come into her own as an adult, as a human, and, you know, really get to live a life. There's many times we also get to see the unfortunate side effects of Sadie having to grow up too soon. There's a lot of quotes where Sadie's basically like, I know someone is lying because I've only been around people who've lied my entire life. You know, I know how to suss it out because I've been lied to my entire life. And there's one on page 158 that I particularly like, I really like, that I'm going to read to you. Basically says, "This is survival, what she's doing right now. I recognize it. A girl who bulldozes a person by being 10 times herself in front of them." It's really sad, thinking that she had to become a mother, an adult at the age of 6, taking care of her sister when she should have been able to grow up as a kid, have a normal childhood. I mean, when she goes to Silas's real house and she sees this big house with a in-ground pool and just all these nice things that she's never been able to have and never gets to have, it's really sad that she grew up the way she did. There's also this really cool section on page 235 which really just reinforces the relationship between Maddie and Sadie, and I think it's a really good way to show their dynamic. She basically says a bunch, when Maddie was this old, I was this old. When Maddie was this old, I was this old, and yada yada. And she does it multiple times, and she goes through stories of them growing up and just doing different things and having fun and some bad things. It just reinforces the relationship between them two, which I liked. There's also this really cool part in the book, there's a lot of cool parts, but where Sadie basically keeps saying in her head, I'm dangerous, I have a knife, but never fully believing it. She's just kind of saying it in her head to kind of psych herself up, until she holds a knife to Ellis's throat and she sees him, how scared he is, and he's kind of crying because she has a knife to his throat, and she starts realizing that whether it's good or bad, she could have the power to kill someone, or at least fake it till she made it, in order to get justice for Maddie. She even says, I was dangerous, I had a knife. It's just a nice, you hear it many, many times where she's like, I'm dangerous, I have a knife, trying to psych herself up, and then she finally says it, yeah, I was dangerous, I had a knife, I could do this if I needed to. Which again, for better or for worse, but now she knows she has the ability to do that. Again, with the relationship between Sadie and her mom, Sadie always resented her mom for walking out on them and for fleeing to LA, it seems. But it goes deeper than that. We go through the whole book believing that Sadie blames her mom for sending that postcard from LA, and, Maddie got into the truck wanting to flee to LA to go see her mom, and the person in the truck was the one who killed her. But we find out later in the book that Sadie doesn't exactly resent her mom for that, she resents herself. Sadie was the one who sent that sent that postcard in order to try to ease Maddie's pain, but in the end, her sending that postcard to Maddie was what killed her. It wasn't Sadie's fault, but that postcard is why she got into the car with that guy, with Keith, and tried to go to LA, and then he was the one who ended up killing her. It was a great twist, and one that is very true to Sadie's character. Her love for Maddie is what killed her. So, and then, when Claire left them, Sadie's mother left them, the last thing she ever says to Sadie is she whispers in her ear and says, I made you. And Sadie always took it as a negative thing, that it was a sense of ownership for her mom, that she was trying to be mean to her daughter. But much later in the book, when we see Wes talking to Claire, we realize that it wasn't out of malice. We finally see Claire opening up and grieving, as a mother should for her daughters. We get to see why Claire really said those words. It wasn't out of malice, at least not totally. She said those words, I made you, because once when Sadie was younger and she was still able to let herself rely on someone before she had to grow up way too soon, she looked up at her mother and said, you made me. It was just a really nice revelation that we see this mother who is distant, who's not with her kids, who's not been there for years. We think she doesn't know anything about her kids. She was on drugs the entire time, but she remembers something that Sadie doesn't. She remembers things about them. She is still trying to be a good mom, even when she left, even though Sadie resented her for it. It just shows how everyone's a hero of their own story. The only time we really get to see Claire's character until the end of the book is through Sadie or through someone else's eyes, and of course they're gonna be upset about it. But then we get to see her in the flesh and see the reasonings behind why she did things. Again, it doesn't excuse it, but it explains a couple things. She isn't as bad as she's made out to be. She has a soft spot for her kids. Don't get me wrong, she still left her kids on their own for a while, but she isn't completely the villain of the story either. So now I'm going to talk very briefly about West. In the beginning of the book, West starts out as this big name reporter who is really only in it for the story, despite not really believing there's even a story to be told. You know, he says girls go missing all the time, you know, why should I care about this story? Or what can I do about it? And is constantly doubting whether it's even necessary or even worth it to look into this case. But by the end of the book, he starts to realize that these cases are important. After talking to Kat and hearing Sadie's stories and just hearing other people's stories about what really happens to missing girls, you know, him having a young daughter himself, he starts to open up and realize that these are important, that I need to be doing something, anything I can to help these people. You know, it's a really great moment of character development for him, I think. You know, a small town like theirs is never really prepared for a murder. You know, they never really expected it to happen, so when that happened, they were not prepared whatsoever. You know, it starts off as a typical story of someone on the lookout for who they're calling their father. Sadie was calling Keith her father in order to find him. You know, someone going missing / getting murdered. Someone from a small town has to leave and go to stop at, you know, the small podunk little hole-in-the-wall diner where everyone's basically like, well, I've seen the guy, but if you know, you gotta pay up. It's a very typical murder mystery story, you know? And trying to find Keith, Sadie finds Ruby at the diner, who leads her to Caddy, which leads her to Marley, Silas's brother, which eventually gets her to Silas. And to find Silas, she has to go through Kendall, his daughter. You get what I'm saying? It's like checkpoint to checkpoint. She has to go here, which leads her to that, which leads her to that, which leads her to that, and that, and that. It's just like a wild goose chase at times, it seems. Everywhere she goes, there's always someone else telling her the next place to go and the next person to find. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the ending and my thoughts on it. Again, this week I read a book with an open ending, which is great. I'm getting kind of tired of open endings though, but I love them. This one I actually really liked because it made sense in a way, with the narration of not knowing the whole point, the whole part of each story. You know, and unfortunately we see the ending of the book through Wes's narration, but we don't get to find out what happens to Sadie because we don't get to see through her narration because it's assumed she's dead. We know Keith died, that he was stabbed by someone and bled out, but we never find out what happened to Sadie after he hit her over the head. It's kind of inferred that he was the one who killed Maddie and then again killed Sadie and buried her somewhere and then came back home and then bled out and died, but we never get it completely confirmed. But in the end, I guess it really completely doesn't matter. I mean, of course I would love to find out, but because Sadie gave everything up for Maddie, and she even gave her life up to find some sort of justice for Maddie, even if it meant killing the person who killed her. And you know, she even says in the book, this won't bring justice, this won't bring peace, but it won't even make me feel better, but it's something I have to do. You know, he doesn't deserve to breathe free air or be alive if he took my sister. Which, as sad as that is, it's kind of beautiful in a way. Don't get me wrong, I would love to know what the ending is, but for now I'm good, I guess. I mean, this is a book that's definitely going to sit with me for a long time. Definitely a long time. I would rate this book a 5 out of 5. I love the switch of narration and the way that it was used to add suspense to the book. It was brilliantly crafted, in my opinion. I loved how all the characters had flaws. Even our main characters weren't good people. Not totally. They had their flaws. They were believable people with stories that a lot of people can relate to. Poverty, abuse, you know, feeling unloved, just trauma in general. I love this book, and it is definitely one that I will recommend to my friends. So yeah, that was my review on Sadie by Courtney Summers. I really liked it. I think it was really good. Let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, bye. Love you.